It is August 1731, 750 meters above the heather-clad valleys of the Scottish Highlands, where the Corrieyairack Pass breaches the Monadlyeth Mountains. 500 soldiers of the British Army attack, not an enemy, but the earth itself. With pickaxe and spade, with gunpowder and raw determination, they are carving a road through terrain that has defied human ambition since time immemorial. The gradient is punishing. 1 foot rises for every 6 feet forward. Highland mist clings to the slopes, obscuring the drop into Glen Tarf below. Each evening, as the light fails and the men return to their tented camps, they have advanced perhaps 1.5 yards per man. At this pace, at this altitude, in this wilderness, they are performing what contemporaries will recognize as an engineering marvel to rival Rome itself. And at the heart of this enterprise stands a man whose name should resonate through British military history with the same force as Wellington or Marlborough, yet today remains known primarily to scholars and walkers of ancient ways. Field Marshal George Wade, builder of 250 miles of military road, constructor of 40 bridges, the man who opened the Scottish Highlands to the machinery of the state. But here lies the paradox that defines Wade's legacy. He built these roads, these magnificent feats of Georgian engineering to suppress Jacobite rebellion, to bring the Highland clans to heel, to ensure that never again could Scotland rise against the crown. Yet, when Bonnie Prince Charlie marched south in 1745, it was Wade's own roads that carried the Jacobite army with unprecedented speed towards the very gates of London. The general's greatest triumph became, in a bitter twist of fate, the instrument of his greatest humiliation. This is the story of how one Anglo-Irish officer, armed with soldiers' labor and government gold, transformed the geography of control in the British Isles. It is a tale of vision and engineering, of military necessity and unintended consequences. It is the story of how Britain tamed the last wild corner of its own island, and discovered that taming and controlling are not the same thing. For in building his roads, Wade did not merely create a military asset. He changed Scotland forever. He opened trade routes, sparked economic development, and laid the foundations for the modern Highland road network that endures to this day. His legacy is written not in battle honors or campaign medals, but in tarmac and stone, in bridges that still span Highland rivers, in the very shape of Scottish infrastructure. This is the story of George Wade and the Great Military Road, the forgotten general who moved mountains. George Wade was born in 1673 at Killavally, County Westmeath, Ireland, the third son of Jerome Wade, a former Cromwellian officer who had been granted Irish lands for his service to the Protectorate. It was an inauspicious beginning for a future field marshal. Third sons inherited neither estates nor expectations. The army offered the only path to advancement for young men of Wade's station. On the 26th of December 1690, 17-year-old George Wade received his commission as ensign in the Earl of Bath's regiment. Within months, he was posted to Flanders, where the 9 Years' War raged between William III's Grand Alliance and the France of Louis XIV. It was a brutal education. At the Battle of Steenkirk in August 1692, Wade experienced the chaotic reality of European warfare, massed infantry, murderous volleys, and the screams of wounded men in summer heat. He survived. More importantly, he learned. Promotion to lieutenant followed in February 1693. For the next 9 years, Wade served as a competent but unremarkable infantry officer, advancing to captain in 1695. These were years of professional development, of understanding regimental life, of mastering the administrative complexities that separate adequate officers from exceptional ones. Opportunity arrived with the War of the Spanish Succession. In 1704, Wade volunteered for service in Portugal under the Earl of Galway, serving as adjutant general with the brevet rank of colonel. The Iberian theater was a backwater compared to Marlborough's triumphs in Flanders, but it was here that Wade distinguished himself. At the Battle of Alcantara in April 1706, commanding Huntingdon's regiment after its colonel fell in action, Wade was wounded leading his men through Spanish defensive positions. He recovered to fight again at Almansa in April 1707. What separated Wade from his peers was not tactical brilliance. His battlefield record was solid but unspectacular, but rather organizational competence and steady leadership. He understood logistics. He grasped the importance of supply lines and communication. He could be trusted with staff work, that unglamorous but essential backbone of military operations. By January 1708, he had risen to brigadier general. By October 1714, he was a major general. These were precisely the skills that would later prove invaluable in the Highlands. Wade was not a dashing cavalry commander or an inspired tactician. He was a military administrator of the first order, methodical, thorough, and capable of translating strategic vision into practical reality. The Jacobite Rising of 1715 brought Wade home. Appointed to security duties in Bath, he uncovered a substantial cache of weapons stockpiled for use by supporters of the exiled James Francis Edward Stuart, the Old Pretender. The discovery was significant enough to win Wade attention in London and a seat in Parliament as MP for Hindon. In 1717, he became colonel of the Earl of Plymouth's regiment of horse. Wade's career progressed steadily through the peacetime army. In 1719, he served as second-in-command during the raid on Vigo in the brief War of the Quadruple Alliance, 10 days of coastal raiding that achieved little but demonstrated British naval reach. He transferred to the fashionable spa town of Bath as MP in 1722, building a grand house next to the abbey that still stands today as a Grade I listed building. But Wade was no mere political soldier. He remained actively engaged with military affairs, and he cultivated relationships with senior figures at court and in government. When George I's ministers required someone to investigate the festering problem of Highland security in 1724, Wade's name emerged. He had combat experience across Europe. He had demonstrated administrative competence. He had proven his loyalty during the 15. He was, crucially, Irish, neither English nor Scottish, and therefore presumably unbiased regarding the ancient enmities between Highlands and Lowlands. In July 1724, Major General George Wade departed London for Scotland. He was 51 years old. His official brief was to inspect the present situation of the Highlanders and to make strict inquiry into the last law for disarming the Highlanders. What he would discover in those wild northern lands would transform not only the Highlands themselves, but Wade's own place in history. The journey north took him into a world that felt, to English eyes, like foreign territory. The Highlands were mountainous, roadless, and governed by ancient clan loyalties that superseded any allegiance to distant monarchs. Gaelic was the common tongue. The clan system, with its complex web of obligation between chiefs and clansmen, represented a form of social organization fundamentally at odds with lowland and English norms. Wade spent months traveling through the glens, meeting with clan chiefs, inspecting government garrisons, and assessing the strategic situation. What he found alarmed him. In December 1724, Wade submitted his report to the king. His estimate was stark. Of approximately 22,000 men in the Highlands capable of bearing arms, some 12,000 were ready to create new troubles and rise in arms to favor the pretender. Only 10,000 could be counted as loyal to the government. The 1716 Disarming Act, passed after the failure of the 15 Rebellion, had proven worthless. Loyal clans had surrendered their weapons. Rebellious clans had hidden theirs. Government forces were scattered in isolated, poorly connected garrisons. Fort William at the head of Loch Linha, Inverness on the Moray Firth, a handful of barracks at strategic locations. But between these, Points lay hundreds of miles of trackless mountain, impenetrable bog, and deep glens where government authority simply did not run. Wade's solution was comprehensive and audacious. First, establish independent Highland companies' militia units, recruited from loyal clans to police their own territories. Second, pass a new, more stringent disarming act with meaningful penalties. Third, construct new fortifications to create a coherent defensive network. And fourth, the recommendation that would define his career: build roads. Proper military roads, engineered to allow the rapid movement of troops, artillery, and supplies. Roads that would pierce the geographical barriers that had for centuries protected Highland independence. Roads that would make the mountains passable for wheeled vehicles and formed bodies of troops. Within a month of his report, George I appointed Wade commander-in-chief of His Majesty's forces, castles, forts, and barracks in North Britain. The government allocated substantial funds. Wade was given authority to implement his own recommendations. The greatest civil engineering project in Scotland since Roman times was about to begin. Wade understood what he was undertaking. Writing to London, he noted that the roads would need to mock moors and bogs and be opened up through rocks and over mountains. He was proposing to do what had never been done in the Highlands to impose human will upon a landscape that had resisted it since the Ice Age. The question was whether British soldiers, armed with Georgian-era technology and fueled by government determination, could succeed where nature had decreed failure. The first of Wade's roads began construction in 1725. The route, Inverness to Fort William, following the southwestern shore of Loch Ness along the Great Glen. Some 60 miles of road through terrain that was, by any measure, formidable. Wade's approach combined military discipline with practical engineering. Each summer, April or May through October, working parties of soldiers would take to the field. Winter was too harsh for such labor. Snow and ice made the work impossible and the men miserable. But for 6 months each year, the Highlands rang with the sound of British soldiers building their revolution in stone and gravel. The construction parties consisted of 100 men, typically drawn from regiments stationed in Scotland. Each party was commanded by a captain, with 2 subalterns, 2 sergeants, and 2 corporals maintaining discipline and organization. A drummer accompanied each party, his rhythm marking the pace of work, his calls regulating the day. The technique was Roman in its simplicity, but Georgian in its execution. First, the route was surveyed. Wade employed skilled engineers to map the most practicable line, prioritizing directness over ease. Where lochs and mountains made straight lines impossible, the roads would bend. But wherever possible, Wade followed the Roman principle. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. The roadbed was excavated to a depth of 3 to 4 feet. The bottom half was filled with compacted stones and boulders, foundation material that would prevent the road from sinking into Highland bog. The top half was filled with compacted gravel, creating a drained, relatively smooth surface. Ditches were dug on both sides to channel water away from the roadbed. The standard width was 16 feet, sufficient for 2 wagons to pass, or for artillery to be maneuvered. Where terrain demanded, the road narrowed to 10 feet. Gradients were kept to no more than 1 in 6, the maximum that a team of horses could manage whilst drawing a gun carriage. The cost averaged £90 per mile, a substantial sum when government revenues were measured in thousands rather than millions. Yet Parliament proved willing to fund Wade's vision. The roads were not mere convenience. They were strategic infrastructure, the sinews of control in a restive province. Each soldier received extra pay for his labor, 6 pence per day above his regular wage. By modern standards, this seems miserly. But in the 1720s, a soldier's base pay was 8 pence daily, from which stoppages for food and equipment reduced the actual sum to perhaps 5 pence. The extra 6 pence more than doubled a soldier's income. Men competed for places on the working parties. The work was brutal. If the roads were to succeed where previous human efforts had failed, they needed to go where previous generations had feared to venture. Wade was not content with valley routes and gentle gradients. His strategic vision demanded that roads breach the mountain barriers themselves. In 1731, Wade tackled his most audacious project, the Corrieyairack Pass. This route would connect Ruthven Barracks in Speyside with Fort Augustus in the Great Glen, climbing to 750 meters above sea level, higher than any road in Britain at that time. The approach from Ruthven followed the upper Spey Valley, crossing Garva Bridge, one of Wade's elegant stone structures that still stands today. Then the road began its inexorable climb towards Corrieyairack, the glacial bowl that gave the pass its Gaelic name. The route entered the Corrie from the southeast, following the burn upwards through increasingly dramatic terrain. And then came the zig-zags. To exit the Corrie and gain the summit plateau, Wade's engineers designed a series of 18 traverses, tight switchbacks, that allowed the road to gain elevation at a manageable gradient. Each traverse was carefully surveyed to maintain that critical 1 in 6 slope. The precision required was extraordinary. Too steep, and loaded wagons would be unable to ascend. Too shallow, and the road would stretch for miles across the mountainside. The soldiers blasted rock with gunpowder where necessary. They built up embankments with stone and earth where the natural slope was too severe. They constructed drainage culverts to prevent winter streams from washing away their work. Through summer storms and clouds of highland midges, through heat and cold and the particular misery of working at altitude in changeable weather, they persevered. Portrait. Wade, surveying construction. Period illustration. Wade himself was no distant commander. Contemporary accounts record him visiting construction sites, inspecting work, dining with his officers in field camps. He understood that morale and leadership were as crucial to this enterprise as engineering skill. The Highlanders watched from the hills as redcoat soldiers transformed their landscape. Wade ensured his men knew their general, shared their hardships. By late 1731, the Corrieyairack Road was complete. At a cost of just £3,000, Wade had created a route that remained passable to military traffic until the 19th century. The achievement was recognized even by those who had no love for the government's Highland policy. The famous verse, often mistakenly attributed to an unknown contemporary, but in fact, from a song, captured the popular reaction. Had you seen these roads before they were made, you would lift up your hands and bless General Wade. But Wade's masterpiece still lay ahead. In 1730, work had begun on a road from Crife through the Smoglen to join the Dunkeld-Inverness route at Dalnacardoch. This road passed through Aberfeldy, where the broad, powerful River Tay presented an obstacle that could not be circumvented. The Tay required a bridge, not a modest Highland span, but a substantial stone structure capable of bearing military traffic, resistant to Highland floods, and impressive enough to symbolize government authority in the region. Wade commissioned William Adam, father of the more famous Robert Adam, and considered the finest architect in Scotland to design the structure. Adam's plans were ambitious: a 5-arched bridge, 112 meters long, with a central span of 18 meters. The structure would be founded on 1,200 oak piles, shod with iron and driven into the riverbed. The piers and abutments would be built of locally quarried chlorite schist from Farrock Hill, but this would be more than merely functional infrastructure. Adam added Baroque flourishes, 4 elegant obelisks flanking the central arch, pyramidal capstones, decorative parapets with raised sections. This would be a monument as well as a bridge, a statement in stone of government permanence and power. On the 23rd of April 1733, General Wade laid the foundation stone himself. Skilled masons had been recruited from across northern England. Through the previous winter, they had dressed and numbered stones at the quarry. When construction began in earnest that summer, the blocks were already prepared for rapid assembly. The work proceeded with remarkable speed. Stone boats ferried material across the Tay. Carpenters constructed timber frameworks, centering to support the arches during construction. Masons laid stone upon numbered stone, each course carefully aligned, each joint packed with mortar mixed from local lime. By early October, Wade was writing to Duncan Forbes of Culloden, the Lord Advocate, explaining that bad weather had slowed progress. Yet the core structure was complete. Through the winter of 1733-34, the finishing work continued. The parapet was added. The obelisks were raised into position. Marble tablets were carved with Latin inscriptions, celebrating the achievement. Admire this military road stretching on this side, and that 250 miles beyond the limits of the Roman one, mocking moors and bogs, opened up through rocks and over mountains, and, as you see, crossing the indignant Tay. The bridge was formally opened in August 1735, at a cost of £4,095, nearly double the cost of the entire Corrieyairack Road. Tay Bridge was by far the most expensive structure in Wade's network. Wade considered it his finest achievement, and justifiably so. Today, nearly 3 centuries later, Tay Bridge at Aberfeldy remains in daily use, carrying the B-846 across the river. It is the only one of Wade's bridges still serving as a major traffic route, a testament to Georgian engineering that modern vehicles have not yet managed to overwhelm. By the time Wade left Scotland in 1740, the network was largely complete. 4 major routes crossed the Highlands. First, Inverness to Fort William via the Great Glen, the original route, improved with a revised alignment in 1732 that followed the southeastern shore of Loch Ness more closely. Second, Dunkeld to Inverness via Corrieyairack Pass, and Ruthven Barracks, the main route from the lowlands into the Central Highlands, completed by 1731. Third, Crieff to Dalnacardoch via Aberfeldy, and the magnificent Tay Bridge finished in 1735, connecting the second route to the commercial center of Crieff. Fourth, Ruthven to Fort Augustus via Corrieyairack Pass, the most dramatic and highest route, completed in 1731. 250 miles of engineered military road, plus some 40 bridges, at an average cost of £70 to £90 per mile. The total expenditure approached £20,000, a substantial fraction of the government's Scottish budget. Encampments had been established at 10-mile intervals, many of which evolved into inns known as kingshouses, some who still serve travelers today. But Wade had built more than roads. The construction program had trained an entire generation of military engineers in large-scale infrastructure projects. The techniques developed in the Highlands drainage, foundation work, bridge construction would be applied across the expanding British Empire. Wade's chief assistant, Major William Caulfield, had absorbed the methodology completely. He would go on to construct another 800 miles of road after Wade's departure, more than tripling the network. Wade had also established the Highland Watch Company's militia forces drawn from loyal clans. The first 6 companies were formed in 1725, with 4 more added in 1739. These companies would be reorganized as the Black Watch Regiment, beginning a tradition of Highland service in the British Army that continues to this day. The inscription on Tay Bridge boasted that the network surpassed Roman achievements. This was not mere propaganda. The Roman road network in Britain had never extended into the Highlands. Wade had accomplished what Rome had not attempted: the opening of the Scottish mountains to wheeled traffic and organized military movement. The question that remained unanswered in 1737, as Wade prepared to hand over command to his successors, was simple. Would the roads work? Would they fulfill their strategic purpose? Would government forces be able to use them to crush Highland rebellion before it could spread? Within a decade, the answer would come, and it would not be the answer Wade expected. By 1743, George Wade had reached the summit of his profession. Appointed Field Marshal on the 17th of December, he took joint command of Anglo-Austrian forces in Flanders during the War of the Austrian Succession. At 70 years of age, after half a century of military service, he stood at the pinnacle of British military command. His reputation rested substantially on his Scottish achievements. Parliament and the King viewed the Highland roads as a triumph of forward-thinking military administration. The network had cost considerable sums, but it represented exactly the kind of strategic infrastructure that separated professional modern armies from their medieval predecessors. Yet Flanders would expose Wade's limitations. As a staff officer, as an administrator, as an engineer of infrastructure, Wade was first-rate. As supreme commander of multinational forces in active theater operations, he was out of his depth. The campaign of 1744 achieved little and was criticized in London and mocked in French propaganda. By early 1745, Wade requested recall, and his command was terminated in March. But the King retained confidence in Wade's administrative abilities. He was appointed Commander-in-Chief in England, a position that seemed largely ceremonial until events in Scotland forced it to become operational. On the 19th of August, 1745, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, grandson of the deposed James II, raised the Stuart standard at Glenfinnan in the Western Highlands. The '45 rebellion had begun. And here unfolded the great paradox of Wade's legacy. The Jacobite army, marching south from the Highlands, used Wade's own roads to move with unprecedented speed. The route from Fort Augustus over Corrieyairack Pass to Dalhousie carried Highland clansmen and their artillery in a fraction of the time that mountain trails would have required. Wade's magnificent infrastructure, built explicitly to enable government forces to crush Highland rebellion, was serving Jacobite forces more effectively than it had ever served the government. Wade, now 72 years old, marched north from Doncaster with 13 battalions. He established himself at Newcastle, expecting the Jacobites to attack through the eastern route. It was a reasonable strategic assessment based on conventional military thinking. But the Jacobites were not conventional. Prince Charles pushed south through Carlisle and into England on the western route, bypassing Wade entirely. By the time Wade realized his error, the Jacobite army was marching on Derby, leaving London exposed and King George II contemplating flight. Command was transferred to Prince William Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, the king's younger son, then 24 years old. Wade, his dignity wounded and his health failing, stepped aside. Cumberland pursued the Jacobites, forcing them back north after they retreated from Derby. The campaign culminated at Culloden in April 1746, where Cumberland's forces crushed the Jacobite army with systematic brutality. Wade played no role in the victory. His roads, particularly the Corrieyairack route, had indeed been used extensively, but primarily by the Jacobites until the final pursuit. The infrastructure designed to prevent rebellion had instead facilitated it. The irony was not lost on Wade's contemporaries or on later historians. Yet to judge Wade's achievement solely by the events of 1745 is to miss the deeper significance of what he accomplished. The military roads fundamentally transformed the Scottish Highlands. They opened territories that had been economically isolated for centuries. Drovers could move cattle to market more efficiently. Merchants could transport goods. Government officials, tax collectors, and justices could reach communities that had previously been beyond effective administration. After 1746, with the Jacobite threat conclusively eliminated at Culloden, the roads' military purpose diminished, but their economic and social impact intensified. Thomas Telford, surveying the Highlands in 1803 for a new program of road improvement, found that many sections of Wade's network had fallen into disrepair, but he also recognized their fundamental importance. Telford's own road program built upon Wade's foundation, often following the same routes with improved engineering. Today's Highland Road network, the A9, the A82, the A889, and numerous minor routes follows alignments originally surveyed by Wade and Caulfield. Modern engineers, with diesel machinery and tarmac, have built upon the vision of Georgian soldiers with pickaxes and gunpowder. The economic transformation Wade inadvertently enabled far exceeded his military objectives. The Highlands were integrated into the British economy. The clan system, already dying after Culloden, could not survive improved communications and market forces. Highland regiments, built on Wade's model of the Highland Watch, became elite units of the British Army, serving across the empire with distinction. Wade died on the 14th of March, 1748, unmarried and aged 75. He left a substantial fortune over £100,000 from investments, including part ownership of lead mines at Strontian. Most of his estate went to his 4 illegitimate children, though he provided generously for his brother's family. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, where a monument by Louis-François Roubiliac commemorates his service. The inscription makes no mention of the 45. It celebrates instead his roads, his bridges, and his forts, the permanent achievements that outlasted the temporary embarrassments of a single campaign. Wade left 2 contradictory legacies. As a military commander in 1745, he failed comprehensively. His strategic misjudgments allowed the Jacobites to penetrate deep into England, threatening the Hanoverian dynasty itself. French propagandists mocked him. Henry Fox wrote caustically that Wade says England is for the first comer, but as an engineer of infrastructure, as a builder of strategic communications, Wade succeeded beyond even his own ambitions. He demonstrated that determined application of engineering skill and military labor could overcome apparently insurmountable geographical obstacles. He proved that infrastructure investment, substantial, systematic, and long-term, could achieve strategic objectives that military force alone could not. Modern military thinkers recognize Wade's achievement. The principle he demonstrated that mobility and logistics are fundamental to military effectiveness is now axiomatic. Special forces and light infantry units study the Highland roads as examples of operational infrastructure enabling strategic reach. The British Army's Royal Engineers trace their institutional emphasis on infrastructure development, partly to the Highland Roads program, the understanding that armies must be able to build as well as fight, that engineering capacity is as crucial as combat effectiveness, was reinforced by Wade's success. His roads endure. The Corrieyairack zig-zags are now protected as a scheduled ancient monument. Thousands of hikers and mountain bikers traverse the route each year, following Wade's stone pathway across terrain that would otherwise be impassable. The Tay Bridge carries modern traffic as it has for nearly 3 centuries. Sections of Wade's road at Killiecrankie preserve the original surface, compacted gravel and stone, still serviceable after 9 generations. Music, building to reflective conclusion. George Wade was not a great general in the conventional sense. He won no famous victories. He commanded no decisive battles. His name appears in no regimental battle honors. But he changed Scotland. He demonstrated what systematic engineering could achieve. He built infrastructure that enabled economic transformation and social change far beyond his military objectives. His roads opened the Highlands not merely to government control, but to modernity itself. The Highland Scotland that exists today, accessible, integrated, economically connected to the rest of Britain, exists in part because George Wade and 500 soldiers at a time spent 16 summers building roads through country that had resisted such efforts since the Romans departed. That is achievement enough for any military career, and it is why Wade deserves recognition not as a conqueror, but as a builder, a man whose legacy is measured in miles of stone and gravel, in bridges that still stand, in routes that still carry traffic 300 years after his soldiers set down their tools. Stand on Wade's Bridge at Aberfeldy on a summer evening, and watch the traffic lights regulate the flow of vehicles across William Adams' 18th-century arches. The obelisks still flank the central span. The Latin inscriptions, though weathered, still boast of roads that mocked bogs and crossed the indignant Tay. Below, the Tay flows as it has for millennia, indifferent to the works of men, yet crossed now by a structure that has endured longer than most human institutions. Wade's bridge has outlasted the Jacobite cause it was built to suppress. It has outlasted the British Empire it once served. It has outlasted the military purpose for which it was conceived. Walk the Corrieyairack Pass, and the zigzags are still there, somewhat eroded, somewhat overgrown, but fundamentally intact. Electricity pylons now follow the route, their engineers using Wade's alignment for the same reason Wade chose it. It's the best way across the mountains. The military purpose has vanished, but the engineering logic remains. Modern satellite imagery reveals the full extent of Wade and Caulfield's achievement. The major Highland routes, A9, A82, A85, A86 follow corridors opened by Georgian soldiers. Telford improved them. Victorian engineers added railways alongside. 20th-century planners built modern highways on the same alignments. But the fundamental geography of Highland communications was established between 1725 and 1740 by an Anglo-Irish general and his sweating redcoats. In Westminster Abbey, Roubiliac's monument shows Wade in Roman dress, a conscious echo of the inscription claiming his roads surpassed Rome's achievements. It is not entirely hyperbole. The Romans built impressive roads in Britain, but they never penetrated the Highland Massif. Wade did. Where imperial Rome stopped at the Antonine Wall, Georgian Britain pushed through to Inverness and Fort William. The monument's position is telling. Wade lies among statesmen, poets, and warriors whose names echo through history: Churchill and Pitt, Tennyson and Browning, Clive and Marlborough. Yet Wade's achievement was fundamentally different from theirs. He conquered no enemy nation. He expanded no imperial frontier. He won no glorious battle. He built roads. There is a lesson in this about the nature of military achievement and historical memory. We remember Waterloo and Trafalgar, Blenheim and Minden, the dramatic moments, the clash of armies, the fate of nations decided in hours. These are the events that capture imagination, that fill regimental histories, that inspire paintings and monuments. But empires are not built by battles alone. They are built by infrastructure and administration, by logistics and communications, by the unglamorous work of ensuring that troops can move, that supplies can flow, that authority can reach from center to periphery. Wade understood this. His roads were instruments of power as surely as cannon or cavalry, perhaps more so, because they endured long after the guns fell silent. The Scottish Parliament, restored in 1999, has debated the preservation of Wade's road network. Some sections have been designated as scheduled ancient monuments. Heritage organizations maintain portions of the original routes as historical footpaths. Tourism boards promote Wade's roads as heritage attractions, a curious transformation for infrastructure designed to suppress Scottish independence. The irony is not lost on modern Scots. The roads built to enable English domination of the Highlands now serve as symbols of shared heritage, as recreational routes for walkers from across Britain and beyond. Infrastructure, it seems, outlives ideology. Stone and gravel transcend politics. In 2013, civil engineers from Dundee University conducted a detailed survey of surviving sections of Wade's roads. Their assessment was unequivocal. Given the technology available in the 1720s and 1730s, Wade's achievement was extraordinary. The gradient management, the drainage systems, the foundation work all demonstrated sophisticated understanding of engineering principles. The engineers noted particularly the durability of Wade's construction. Sections that have remained in use for nearly 3 centuries show remarkably little deterioration. The compacted stone foundation, the careful attention to drainage, the quality of workmanship all contributed to roads that have outlasted their builders by 10 generations. Modern contractors, asked to estimate the cost of replicating Wade's work with 18th-century technology, suggested figures far exceeding Wade's actual expenditure. The efficiency of his program, achieved through military discipline and systematic organization, would be difficult to match even today. At the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, where British Army officers are trained, Wade's Highland roads feature in lectures on military logistics and infrastructure. The case study illustrates fundamental principles: that mobility is force multiplier, that infrastructure investment enables operational effectiveness, that engineering capacity is as crucial to military success as combat prowess. Young officers studying 21st-century asymmetric warfare and counterinsurgency operations find unexpected resonance in Wade's 18th-century challenges. How do you extend government control into ungoverned spaces? How do you overcome geographical barriers? How do you balance infrastructure investment against immediate operational needs? These questions remain as relevant in Afghanistan or the Sahel as they were in the Scottish Highlands 3 centuries ago. There is something poignant about Wade's story. He was a man of his time, a servant of the Hanoverian state, committed to suppressing Jacobitism and extending government authority into resistant territories. He was no reformer, no critic of the imperial project. He built his roads to enable military conquest and political control. Yet his achievement transcended his intentions. The roads that were meant to suppress Scottish identity became, in time, part of Scottish heritage. The infrastructure designed for military domination enabled economic development and social transformation. The man who set out to tame the Highlands for London ended up opening them to the world. This is often how history works. We act with specific intentions, but we create consequences we never imagined. Wade could not have foreseen that his military roads would become recreational paths. He could not have anticipated that tourists would walk the Corrieyairack for pleasure. He certainly never imagined that, 3 centuries on, people would celebrate his engineering whilst forgetting the imperial context in which it occurred. Wade's house in Bath No. 1, Abbey Green, survives as a private residence. A blue plaque identifies it as his home. Tourists photographing Bath Abbey occasionally notice it. Most have no idea who George Wade was, and perhaps that is fitting. Wade was never meant to be a household name. He was an engineer, an administrator, a systematic builder rather than a charismatic leader. His work was too practical, too methodical, too concerned with gradients and drainage to capture popular imagination. But step back and see what he accomplished. 250 miles of road through country that had never known roads. 40 bridges, some still carrying traffic. A transformation of Highland geography that enabled everything that followed, from Culloden to the clearances, from Victorian tourism to modern infrastructure, from Clan Scotland to contemporary Highland economy. Every day, thousands of vehicles traverse the Highlands on roads that follow routes Wade established. They do so without thinking about Georgian soldiers with pickaxes, without considering the engineering challenges of building roads at altitude, without reflecting on the political and military context that motivated such extraordinary effort. That is the nature of successful infrastructure. It becomes invisible. It becomes assumed. It becomes so thoroughly integrated into daily life that we forget it was ever built at all. George Wade deserves better than to be forgotten. Not because he was a great general, he was not. Not because his strategic judgment was flawless, it was not. Not even because his roads achieved their immediate military purpose, they did not, at least not in 1745. Wade deserves to be remembered because he demonstrated what vision, systematic effort, and engineering skill could achieve. Because he showed that infrastructure is strategy. Because he built something that lasted. Because 3 centuries after his soldiers set down their tools, you can still walk Wade's roads, still cross Wade's bridges, still follow Wade's routes through the Scottish Highlands. In an age of instant gratification and short-term thinking, there is something instructive about a man who spent 16 years building roads that took 3 centuries to truly vindicate. Wade built for permanence, whether he intended to or not. He built roads that would outlast battles, that would serve purposes he never imagined, that would connect Scotland in ways that transcended his military objectives. That is legacy. That is achievement. That is why forgotten heroes matter, not because their stories are dramatic, but because their work endures. The Scottish Highlands remain wild and beautiful, but they are no longer impenetrable. You can drive from Edinburgh to Inverness in under 4 hours. You can cycle the Corrieyairack if you're fit enough. You can walk beside Loch Ness on trails that follow Wade's alignment. The mountains are still there. The glens are still deep. The weather is still brutal in winter. But the land is open now, accessible, crossed by roads that mock bogs and traverse mountains. George Wade did that. An Anglo-Irish officer with a methodical mind and a gift for organization, spent 16 summers transforming a landscape. His soldiers moved mountains not metaphorically, but literally, one pickaxe blow at a time. That is worth remembering. That is worth celebrating. And that is why, when you cross the Tay at Aberfeldy, you should pause for a moment and read the weathered Latin inscription and think about the forgotten general who built roads that still connect Scotland 300 years later.